So welcome to a conversation with Courtney Stevens and Pacho Velez, filmmakers of the American sector. This is program number 9 in the international competition. And here we have Courtney and Pacho. Thanks again for joining us. This, I guess the nice thing about the fact that we are in different time zones is that it's both morning, afternoon, evening, which reflects the way that people will watch this video at like different moments of the day. I wanted to start, I guess, with a question, with the most obvious question, or like start by the beginning of what was the first piece of the wall. What triggered the project, or like which piece did you begin with, or how did it start like building?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Maria, for inviting us, and thank you to Punto de Vista. It's very exciting to be showing even virtually in Spain. So the very first piece that we saw was at the Reagan Presidential Library. And I'd actually been up there doing research for my last film. The archives would close for lunch, and everybody would go outside and sit at the picnic table and eat a sandwich. And this picnic table was right next to a large segment of the Berlin Wall. And visitors to the Reagan Presidential Library would walk past and just say sort of the most astonishing things about this fragment and what it meant for America, what it meant for their own personal history. And it became clear very quickly that this chunk of fairly ugly concrete was really a kind of touchstone for people to talk about all different kinds of things, all different kinds of larger ideas about freedom, democracy, sort of their understandings of history. And that really what they were talking about at the end of the day was not the history of Berlin, but some kind of idea of America that was increasingly crumbling, falling apart. We shot this all during the Trump presidency, and so thinking about that moment and the sort of moment of '89 and the kind of the excitement of that moment and where we were today was definitely a large part of that. Courtney and I are good friends and have been working together in various capacities for a long time. And we started talking about the film shortly after those visits to the Reagan Presidential Library. And then, Courtney, you want to talk about getting involved as well, or?
Oh yeah, sure. So I live in Los Angeles, and Pacho lives in New York. So, and the Reagan Library is here in LA or outside of LA. So it was interesting because I think throughout the way that we went about shooting the film was to kind of map a region, and then we would do these sort of these rapid road trips of trying to shoot as many as we could pack in. But our first one was in California, and it was just sort of driving from here up north to near San Francisco, where there's another piece. And I think it was on that first trip that we kind of, we didn't know how we were going to put this film together. And it was on this trip that we started, just shooting. We knew what to shoot, but we weren't sure, how do you get this character of a wall to develop, to in some ways kind of tell its own story. And so, yeah, I got involved to do sound, and I think that we thought it was just going to be environmental sound, but we would show up in these places and people would be barbecuing, or they would be, or we would have a student taking us around, and the student would have their own things to say. And it became that just doing environmental sound became this way of kind of collecting a different part of this wall. So many of those conversations, ended up being the kind of fabric of the film.
Mm-hmm. And you feel that evolution also. I guess the beginning of the film, is well, not photographic, but like we just see walls and are not giving much context. And you two become more and more present because we move from those like interviews to also hearing your conversations with. I think that's like really moving and funny and profound, the way people can't want to talk to you about it. And maybe that reflects your first experience in the Reagan Library, that the wall becomes this excuse to have conversations, or this prompt to. I wondered if you were almost using at some point the wall as a MacGuffin, but it's not really a MacGuffin, but it is an excuse in order to talk about America indirectly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's we're in a number of places in the film, we're walking into communities where, Courtney and I read as fairly liberal, fairly elite in the US. And we're walking into communities that would be suspicious of us in certain ways. America is extremely polarized right now. And so the wall becomes a kind of excuse to talk about other kinds of ideas, right? To talk about what freedom means, what individualism means, and what the sort of people's hopes are for the future too, a little bit, and sort of political ideas in a way that doesn't trigger defensiveness if we had approached those topics directly.
Yeah, because
I love actually what.
Like, it says no, please, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I love what Courtney was saying too about environmental sound and the thinking of dialogue or these conversations as a kind of environmental sound, right? Where the separation is not between like recording the ambience and then recording interviews, but like the interviews are a kind of ambience in the film.
Yeah, there are many that or I don't know, maybe there are some that are presented distinctively or clearly as interviews, and but then we move into that gray area. I think with The Man Who's Fishing, that like casual conversation that like builds up into like an important exchange. But I really like the ladies in is it the Churchill Museum, the Winston Churchill Museum, which I think it's sort of amazing that you have one, and that seems like a very natural exchange. I also when you were saying about how to structure, that's also what seems like this like huge achievement in the film, because you start watching it and you're like, okay, after a few minutes you think, oh, I get it, but then it never exhausts itself, and so I think there is this brilliance in the editing or in the construction, which I imagine must have been like even harder than maybe getting access to some of the walls. Or maybe if you could talk about that. The
editing was a long process, and it was, that's wonderful that you felt that way, and thank you. I think that we knew that it was a risk that, at some point you're just sort of doing, okay, 2 minutes here, 2 minutes there, and we actually shot probably 30 more places that are in the film. So we were, I think at the beginning felt, oh, we'll be complete, we'll make this index and then we'll show every single site. And for 1 minute, we had some structural ideas like that. And we wanted to be able to, stick with a kind of formality that could hold this thing, which is all the same, right? It's a repetition, but within that repetition, start to sort of diverge with itself and kind of surprise people and develop, So I think it was a lot of just watching. We edited for, I think, a good 2 years, and trying to understand what, almost like beads on a necklace, like what each one does, and then how it complicates, what happens before it. So there's some that we love that are not in the film, and it shocks me. but yeah. We worked with a wonderful editor, Dunya Sachov, who's based in Paris, and so we it was like this. We would meet in New York, merge there, or, it was a very sort of tag team effort.
Dunya is based in Paris, but was born in the Soviet Union, and so we always sort of joke that she was the other voice in the room, the other side of the Iron Curtain in the edit room.
Yeah, there is that scene with the woman from Ukraine who talks, which I imagined then would have been quite compelling to Dunya as well if she grew up in the Soviet Union. This sense of she talks about Lenin and the statues of Lenin and growing up, looking up to him, and then like the day that the Soviet Union collapses, then we start tearing down the statues, no, and like how that shift in historical significance. And watching the film, I kept thinking, I guess we're first struck by geographical displacement, no, like the walls shouldn't be there. The wall shouldn't be in a mall in the US, or at some point I think you mentioned how there are so many in Southern California, and they're like just decorative and like rich people's houses, and so there is a geographical displacement, but then there is also chronological displacement, like the wall sort of embodies the 20th century. So I think there is this question also of what is it still doing there, or what, like it's like an anachronism. And then you find that great plays that center for, I can't remember, anachronistic expression or something like that, where they also have the wall. And then I don't know, but now you've like filmed so many, so can you still have that like relationship of its anachronistic like strangeness or displacedness, or did you come to see it as just part of the landscape in its like repetition?
You mean, is it still strange to us? I think it still is. Yeah. Or, did it become normalized? Is that the question?
Yeah, I think so, because I think that's also the thing with the editing, no? Is this like, you were talking about that like structure, or that, but even though we see so many, even though you've left some out, it is still shocking every time like a new one is introduced. But so then I wonder, like your own relationship to it through this whole process of like chasing it across the US, having conversations, and then having to make sense of it over several years through editing.
Yeah, I think the humor of, it's such a blunt object, and it's so big. And I think, it never stops being aggressive in a certain way, even in the frame, that it just is. So I think that, yeah, that kind of, I think that maintained for us visually and was part of, I think is part of the strange humor in the film, that that the wall is so confrontational and yet is so kind of empty in a certain kind of way. It's only, I started to have this sort of, I live in LA, there's a lot of concrete, and I began to have these sorts of, I would look at the divider on a freeway, and I'd think, it's just the equivalent. It's just concrete, it's just this, but people have, we would go to places where people would, they would reach out, and they would touch the wall, and it was like a charged object, it was something that had been, had distilled time, for people. And so the relative value of it was very interesting to us, the way that, and the literal value, that it was both on eBay for like $5,000 one piece, that's how a museum had gotten it. And then we would hear another piece was, $100,000, and it came with all these important papers, and so this idea of just conveying value, I think certainly in our minds that it's all become relative as we've sort of understood the full scope of it. But I think there's a mystery there, there's a mystery of human meaning, and it distills that. And I think, that to me is a more powerful indicator of how history works than, an object in a certain way.
It has this strange feel. It feels like a work of modern art, right? It sort of ends up like if I told you that this was a sculpture by Richard Serra, you wouldn't tell me I was wrong, right? Like, I mean, it has this other sort of strange energy to it, and it's obviously it's not an artwork. It's not at all that, but it does like somehow this weird way that like modern art like shifted to meet it, or it shifted to meet modern art. I don't know exactly what it is, but it has this sort of sculptural quality um, to it, and sort of thinking through where that came from. And somehow the repetition is part of that kind of work, right? Like the way that with a Donald Judd, you see one box, you see 30 boxes. Suddenly, it's like, oh, it's art, right? Like, so there's some kind of like other training that we've all had from experiencing minimalism that does something too, is like triggered by the project, also for better or worse. Um, um, I'd also say that as we visited, and I think it's true in the film, so there's the experience of making the film and then the experience of viewing the film. And in both cases, it's an experience of seeing, wall after wall after wall after wall. And in both cases, I think there's a process of kind of getting bored with the wall a little bit and starting to pay much more attention to the background than to the foreground. And I think that that's kind of interesting, and that definitely was happening to us. We get way more excited about the environment and the landscape, and whatever the built environment was around the wall, than we were about the chunk itself and any kind of decorations on the piece. And hopefully some of that starts to happen in the film too, where you're actually watching the film not for the figure, not for the thing in the foreground, but you're watching the film for the background, which is an interesting way of viewing, right? Where you're kind of ignoring the subject, and just sort of paying attention to the environment.
Well, I mean, I do think that happens because, like, I mean, not that only that it happened to you, but that it happens in the film. I mean, there is that whole section in East Berlin, and when it finished, I was in East Berlin in, I think, Pennsylvania, and when it finished, I mean, I didn't go back to watch it, but when that section finished, I thought, wait a minute, was there a wall there? And I don't think there was a wall in that section. You're talking to the mayor. But I thought I don't want to go back and forensically examine this section. But maybe it is that part of the film where we're becoming more engaged with the landscape, as you say, and the subjects and the voices, and all the other concerns, and where the wall becomes also more metaphorical for many other things. But I wondered also, I mean, because obviously, I guess you probably set off with an idea of what you would use the wall to talk about, and you mentioned, there are all these questions of ideas around freedom and what it means, or even what this word means to different people, depending on where you are and what your life experience is and how oppressed you've been or not. But then I wondered if through the process of all these encounters, if you were like surprised by some of the meanings and ideas that emerged or that were evoked. That, I mean, because there is like the obvious references to Trump's wall. I mean, rewatching it last night, I kept thinking about the all these borders that are being reactivated because of the pandemic, and obviously this was not. It's just me watching it now and thinking of this new walls that are being built between like European nations. For instance, I'm in the UK and I can't leave the island at the moment. But then thought of those like I mean, you probably had Trump's wall in your mind, but were there other things that surprised you in the process?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was foremost in our mind when we started. I think we thought somehow, they're very different histories, and yet I think we thought we could use this as a proxy to talk about the southern border, and certainly that was there and it was on people's minds. But I think the news cycle, it also shifts over the course of a few years, in terms of what is at the very top of people's minds. And I think I think also monuments, you know, the tearing down of monuments here in America, the question of what should remain and what represents what, and if it's important to remember, and all of those questions were also really on people's minds, and even visible in the landscape. I mean, I think we went twice through Virginia, and on our second visit, all the Confederate monuments had graffiti on them and had protective fence around them, or so that was also happening. So I think what was surprising. I mean, some of course, the actual locations were surprising and interesting, but I think we did go in with, actually, at least for me, like more cynicism than we came out of this with. Interestingly, I mean, I think we went in thinking we could read it. We were, okay, it's like a trophy. People display it as a way of indicating the power of their own institution or the legacy of a great man, or whatever. And I think we came out of it just feeling that it was almost like a very open symbol for people's longings, and sometimes those longings, I would reject, but at the same time, I see that as very human at some other level. So yeah, I mean, and I think we encountered people who like touched us with their attachment to maybe not it, but to some of those meanings. What do you think, Pacho?
Oh yeah, just that it was as you're saying, it was a very receptive process, and so a lot of it is we definitely had our own ideas about what was going to emerge, and we would ask certain questions in places, but a lot of the sort of the conversation was we were listening as much as we were sort of asserting throughout the film.
I think I was just getting told that we've got just a few minutes left. So maybe going back to one of, I mean, I this is more out of curiosity, also, like about because returning to the idea of MacGuffins or detective work. How if you could talk about the process of identifying, because you saw that first piece in the Reagan Library. But did you then know how many more pieces were there in America, or did that, and how did you find them? I mean, are there other wall fanatics out there in the dark spaces of the interweb who could help you? Or
there are catalogs online, but it's also it's surprisingly fluid. It does shift, so there isn't really a definitive number at this point. Pieces circulate. This, for some examples, there was a children's museum in Marble's Head, North Carolina, that was supposed to have one, and somehow the museum had closed, and this piece of the wall, no one really knew where it was, and I couldn't get in touch with anybody who is part of this now defunct museum. So who knows what's going on with that piece. Obviously, in the film, there's the story of the man who bought his piece at a bankruptcy auction and is presenting it in front of his restaurant. So that's a piece that 10 years ago was hidden from the public and now is in the public view. There's also like a fair number of sort of fake pieces or recreations, surprisingly, like that we would encounter. So that was going on.
You might have crossed the country to film a piece and then it turned out to be a fake, or no? And
that
then
happened
you would just
in Fort
have
Knox.
to keep driving.
Yeah, we went to the General George Patton Museum of American Leadership in Fort Knox, Kentucky. And they had a sort of wonderful recreation of the wall right in front of George Patton's Jeep. the Jeep that I guess he drove around in during World War II. And so there were moments like that. Like basically after that happened, we learned to like double check and like be certain that we were seeing a like genuine piece. But then there's also this other thing called the German wall, which was there was other pieces of wall, other places in Germany that weren't in Berlin, and sometimes people would mislabel those pieces also.
Yeah, so the square ones that you sometimes see where Moses is, or person like Moses is standing in front of it, we think that's part of this hinterland wall, which is different, but it's displayed as the Berlin Wall because that's what's in the American consciousness. So but to your question, sometimes it was just word of mouth. People would be like, oh, my dad is part of this German social club in Ohio. They have one. We'd look on the internet, there'd be no trace of it. I mean, we heard about some after even we finished, and we thought, oh, all right, well, next film.
Yeah, I really like the fact that, I mean, I guess now you've revealed that there are many more, but I guess when we're watching the film, we might be fooled into thinking that it's complete. And I like the fact that you include that conversation with the CIA woman, who, I mean, is maybe not very helpful, but at the same time, gets sort of very excited and gives much more away than one would expect someone to give on a phone call about like the historical significance of the Berlin Wall fall for like the agency's like identity. And I thought that was great, this sense that even though that even when we can't see it, it's still there. Like it's like that wall has been documented even though you couldn't access it. But then many of them, yeah, sorry.
Oh, I love how she makes the CIA spokesperson makes a very sort of Adam Curtis point by connecting sort of psychology to state, the state security apparatus. It's just like a straight line. It's great. But, sorry to interrupt.
Because no, I interrupted you. I mean, this is the weird thing with this thing. I mean, I guess many of them, or a majority, I don't know if it's a majority, but at least many of the ones that you film are in like official buildings or government buildings, which I guess maybe seems unsurprising. But was it like, did that make it difficult for you to access them and to have those conversations?
We went through a little bit of red tape, like at the State Department. We had dogs sniff our cameras, and I mean, there's a bit of that. But strangely, people were kind of into the project. I mean, even governmental institutions. So the only place we actually hit that we really got denied access was I think an army base, who just thought they thought our project was too small, and so it wasn't really worth their time to. So it could be true.
I had a conversation with their sort of press person, and he said to me, "You realize that even Michael Bay has to get permission." And I was like, "All right," so we had to fill out the same form that Michael Bay does, and we're rejected.
Well, this is probably the first time Michael Bay has come up in a Punto de Vista Q&A. So. Well, I mean, I could keep asking, but just out of curiosity, but I know that like I've already gone over the allocated time. But thank you both so much. Just to say that the film will be shown to like a real audience in a cinema in Pamplona. So,
that's wonderful.
Yeah. So there will be, I mean, the festival is happening in a hybrid form, online and on site. So yeah, people will get to see it in the monumental grandeur of like cinema projection. But yeah, thank you both for.
I haven't been to a movie theater in a year at this point.
Me neither.
So crazy. Well, thank you, Maria. Thank you so much. Thank you again to Punto de Vista. It's a real pleasure to share it with your audience. So.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.